Thank you, Jacob, and thank you all. Again, my name is EJ John, and I should invite the panelists up here since they're the panel. So a little bit about myself. I'm a research and policy analyst at the American Indian Policy Institute here at ASU. My background is not research. My background is not anything health related. I'm a policy analyst. I've worked with the Navajo Nation, doing the same kind of policy analysis work, policy development, and also here at ASU, doing that as well. So, but I did have the privilege and the honor to work with this group that our panelists are part of, developing a genomic research policy for the Navajo Nation. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I'll let our panel get situated really quick. All right, thank you, everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and have the panel introduce themselves. We'll start at the far side over there with Mr. Phelps.
Oh, there we go. Yate, Shea Walter Phelps in Shea. Na Katrina Claw, Bashin, Todachini, that's a Chido, Tsanajini, the Shanala. Dahilan Holia, the Aya, Ado H is a kid. Good morning, everybody. I'm Walter Phelps, and I'm from, my people are from the Grand Falls area, which is right along the Little Colorado River between Loop and Flagstaff. So that's a couple hours drive from here. So nice trip down here. So, but we're happy to be here and we're excited to present to you this morning.
Everyone. Katrina Claw, Tuahana Nishla, Dashchini Bashichin, Twitchini Dashache, Batani Dashanella, Dak Elana Deatnasha, Ade, Debenetsa, Hahotso, Kesht. Good morning, everyone. I am Katrina Claw. I'm originally from Many Farms, Arizona, and grew up there on the Navajo Nation. Currently, I'm an assistant professor at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. I'm in the Department of Biomedical Informatics, and a lot of my research is related to pharmacogenomics, personalizing medicine, and thinking about the ethical, legal, and social implications of genomic research with Indigenous communities. And I'm very happy to be here and good to see everyone this morning.
Carissa Sherman to Bahan Nishlan, do Beligana Bashishchin, Sinajini Edishache, Beligana Edishanella, Shokante Dint Nasha. Hello, everyone. My name is Carissa. My family's from Ganado, Arizona, and I am a second year in the Human Medical Genetics and Genomics PhD program at the University of Anschutz. And I am in Dr. Katrina Claw's lab, and I do a little bit of everything that she just said, so I won't go over it again. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's go ahead and just kind of take maybe 10 minutes or so and just talk about your work with the genomics research policy and what that experience has been like. And I believe we have some slides up. So I think Mr. Phelps, you go first. So, or whoever his slides are up.
Good morning again, and it is an honor and a privilege, and I want to thank ASU and EJ and Dr. Moore and others for giving us the opportunity to present a very worthwhile project we've been working on for several years now. I had the privilege to serve on the Navajo Nation Council ever since they reduced from 88 members to 22. So, or 25 or 24. I'm gone for a few years. I already forgot how many there was. But one of the greatest privileges I had was I was assigned to serve on the NIH Advisory Council, National Institute of Health. And it was one of the most challenging and most exciting appointments that I had, and I really enjoyed that. But it really broadened my perspective about research all over Indian country and actually all around the world that NIH was doing, all the resources, you know, how much funding that NIH gets and all the research areas of projects that they focus on. But particularly our interest as tribal leaders was to focus on activities that were going on within Indian country and the laws and the policies that were affecting tribal communities on all aspects of research projects. So what the Navajo Committee did after a few years of working with them, Navajo is one of the committees of the Navajo Nation Council, and also the Health and Education Human Service Committee was they authorized what they called the Navajo Nation Genetics Policy Development Working Group. So the body that we work with is actually an official body that is recognized and established by the council. So the working group that we were able to form with the leadership of the Navajo IRB, the Navajo Institutional Review Board, we've been able to work. And so our focus and our mission has been to develop a genetics policy, a genetics research policy for the Navajo Nation. So let me go down to who we are. We have several collaborators, and of course, the Navajo Nation Institutional Health Review Board, and also the Navajo Division of Health play key roles in this whole discussion. And then also the Navajo Office of Government Development. And actually, EJ was one of the members of the Government Development Office, and we had the privilege of working with him at that time as well. And then we work with the researchers. These are Navajo professors that are spread across several different universities like University of Colorado, UCLA, University of New Mexico, the Neck College, what's the other college there? Can't see my notes here. Yeah, Navajo Technical University. And then also the community groups. Because the policy is such a very unique and very sensitive area of genetics, you know, dealing with basic human health and research. We also focused a lot with the spiritual leaders, like the Navajo Association, Navajo Medicine Man's Association, and also faith-based groups as well. And then community stakeholders. A lot of our participants in the working group involved health workers, elders, students, and you know, just basically community leaders. And then the other thing that we did is once we started working on our policy, we found that there was so many different pieces of aspects of activity that we needed to focus on. So we broke it up into subcommittees. And so we had a subcommittee on policy, another on science and education, community education, and then, of course, a research subcommittee. So this way we were able to, you know, have more in-depth discussion on different areas. But you might be wondering why did the Navajo Nation Council create this working group? Well, it so happened that back in 2002, in April of 2002, the Navajo Nation Council at that time, the 88 Council, the Health Committee of the Council had initiated what they call a moratorium, which is basically a ban on genetic research, any and all type of genetic research. And the reason that the Navajo IRB advised this to the leadership was because there was no guidance. There was no policies or guidelines in place when it came to genetic research. So the best thing that they decided to do at the time was just to develop this moratorium until the condition was until a policy could be developed. So of course, years have gone by, many years have gone by, and it wasn't until the 23rd Council that the Nabakiatik Committee established a working group, which is to basically focus on developing a policy. So that's what this committee has been doing, that we've been working with. And so now we have, we've been focusing on this, and the education piece that we've been going back to the community is, the benefits of genetic research is because of, it increases our knowledge of health and diseases. There's the potential of personalized medicine, and you can predict certain diseases and risk through genetic research. And I think because of all of our experience that we've gone through with COVID, it's even more critical that we have a better handle on, opportunities where health research can be advanced. Of course, there's also disadvantages, timelines. The benefits can be long-term. Trying to see the feedback it can take a long time. There's limited infrastructure on Navajo, which is always a challenge because we're such an isolated rural community. And then also the purpose of the policy. And I kind of condensed this, and I'm trying to see this here real quickly. Sorry about this. To provide guidance to the Navajo Nation Human Research Review Board on all genetic and genomic related research applications to ensure all research activities are consistent with health, education goals of the Navajo Nation, to ensure responsible use of all genetic and genomic research data and biospecimens, to guard the integrity of traditional and cultural values of the Navajo people. And then the policy that we worked on basically is in draft form now. And it's actually before the council, the 24th council, which is now, almost coming to an end, the end of this month. So we're hoping that a policy will be developed that can be presented to the council, and then once they embrace it, if they do adopt it, and then we're going to move forward, hopefully with the new council, and then begin to address the moratorium at that end. So I'll conclude my comments here, and thank you very much.
Thank you. That was a really good overview. And yeah, I was a part of a group early on. I was at Navajo. It's a lot of work. It was a lot of work, and I really applaud all the group members' efforts. So next we'll go to Dr. Claw.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps, for giving us that overview. So I don't have any slides, but I will be sort of providing the researcher perspective and sort of a broader perspective on my work in genomics with Indigenous communities. So like I said, broadly, I study pharmacogenomics, which is looking at genetic variants related to drug metabolism. And this means that for a lot of us, many of the drugs that we take, a lot of the way we metabolize that or process that is due to our genetics. So I don't know if anyone here has ever been prescribed codeine, but codeine is like a very potent drug or medication that is often prescribed for pain relief. But we have a lot of people who, if they're given the standard dose of codeine, a lot of people have negative reactions or adverse reactions. And a lot of that is due to the genetic variants in your DNA. So that is the focus of my research program. But what I've found as I have been working with Native communities is that there is virtually very little to no data or studies that involve Native communities in a culturally appropriate way. And so that is why my labs is really interested in working with Native communities all over. So I work with the Navajo Nation, but I also work with many tribes. So I work with tribes in Montana. I work with tribes in Alaska. I also work with 12 tribes across Arizona, Oklahoma, and North and South Dakota. And then I work with a tribe in British Columbia as well. So with many of these tribal nations that I work with, what I've found is that the research process is very different and unique with every tribe that I work with. And a lot of people come into this field or a lot of researchers feel very privileged and think that the data should be made available to them, but that is not how I approach my research. I try to use an ethical framework as well as do as much community engaged research as I can before I even propose a project. So with all of these tribal nations that I'm working with, the general theme is looking at pharmacogenomic or looking at other ethical concerns from the communities, but each of these is a very unique project. I do acknowledge tribal sovereignty, so I go through what those tribes require, which might be going through my, well, definitely through my institutional IRB, but also going through tribal oversight bodies, tribal IRBs. Not every tribe has an IRB. Some of them have tribal councils that they prefer you to go through. In the United States, even though there are over 570 tribes, there are only about less than 50 tribal IRBs. So in terms of doing research with tribes, it's really a unique process with every tribe that I approach. And most of the tribes require that I submit my publications through their oversight bodies before they're published, as well as presentations. So I did want to highlight my research with the Navajo Nation. So I was I was kind of in the right place at the right time at University of Washington back in 2017. I worked very closely with my colleague, Dr. Nanaba Garrison, who was at University of Washington then, but now is at UCLA. So her and I have worked together for many years, and right around when the Navajo Nation and Mr. Phelps had approached Dr. Garrison to think about the genetic moratorium and what are the implications for the Navajo Nation. But what Dr. Garrison and I noticed was that even though we sort of had the history of the moratorium and why things were put in place, there really was no empirical data about what did Navajo people think about the policy or about the genetic moratorium, or more broadly, what did they think about DNA and what were their cultural connections to DNA, or even what was DNA in the Navajo language. So there had been no study that had even asked people about this. So there really was no data when policymakers were considering the moratorium. So around the same time as when the working group was formed, Dr. Garrison and I went to the Navajo Nation IRB, and we were able to get a study approved through their IRB process for gathering empirical data from the Navajo community. So this project has since then grown, but initially we had proposed to do interviews with Navajo community members, one-on-one interviews. So we've conducted over 50 interviews with Navajo people, some in the Navajo language, some in English. These range from anyone from researchers to health workers to traditional healers. We really wanted to get a broad perspective. And then once we had collected those interviews, we developed a more broad survey for the Navajo community. So we worked with the Diné Policy Institute and Dr. Frank Sage, who was the director at that time, and we implemented this broad community survey. We had over 740 respondents. A lot of these surveys were collected at Navajo agency meetings. Right now, we've published that data. Another thing that resulted from this, we wanted to do community focus groups and deliberations. So we wanted our Navajo community members to deliberate on why the moratorium and what did they think should happen. So it was really fun to do this past year. We ended up doing a virtual deliberation with Navajo community members, in which Mr. Phelps helped facilitate a lot of those conversations. And then so one of the big results from that community-wide survey was that we asked people, did you know about the moratorium? And over 65% of people did not know about the moratorium or had no knowledge of it, despite the fact that it's been in place for the last 20 years. But one of the resounding results from that survey was that people wanted more education. They wanted more information about genetics in general, about the research process. So over 40% of our respondents said they just wanted more information. And so that was kind of how our next project started. So we are collaborating with the NARCH project at Diné College. So they invited us to submit a pilot project, and that whole pilot project is focused on increasing genetic literacy in the Navajo Nation. So we are partnered with various institutions, including Diné College. We are creating a glossary of genetic terms in the translating from English into the Navajo language. So one of the questions, what is DNA? It's called Inapetlol in Navajo. But we are hoping to distribute that in the next year. Once that is finalized, we are creating a cultural framework for thinking about genomic research and involving a lot of cultural leaders on the Navajo Nation. We have funding to create digital stories, short digital stories, about 5 minutes in length, which talk about different topics related to genomics. And then we are planning a larger research conference in the near future where we will invite Navajo community members and researchers and stakeholders to learn more about our efforts and the genetic policy. So yeah, I think that as I'll end here, but I wanted to end with a quote by a very eminent scholar, Dr. Kim Tallbear, and she was quoted as saying that if you want to do genetic research with tribal communities, you have to be willing to make lifelong relationships. And that's how I approach my research with tribal communities. And I'm so honored to be working with my Navajo community members as well as Navajo leaders. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that overview and really sharing that experience with us. Next, we'll go to Carissa, who's been doing a lot of the hands-on work and assisting and offering her knowledge and expertise to the group.
Could we have the slides back up, please? Okay, I'll also trust you to move it on the slides. Awesome. So my project is examining perspectives of researchers regarding genetic research on the Navajo Nation. And I just want to say it's really exciting to be a part of a project where I can work with my community. And this project is part of the Perspectives in Genetic Research on the Navajo Nation. Awesome. And so since Mr. Phelps and Katrina or Dr. Claw provided background, I'm going to use that and move forward into my research question. Maybe. Okay, there we go. So if you see NNHRRB, that refers to the Navajo Nation Human Research Review Board, and I'm just going to call it the Navajo IRB. But our research question for this project is, how do researchers with Navajo IRB approved projects perceive genetic research on the Navajo Nation? And so briefly, I'll go over some summary statistics and some of the responses we got. So how did we do this? We distributed an online survey with qualitative and quantitative questions, and we sent this to researchers with approved projects by the Navajo IRB, and I'll go more in depth on the next slide. And then we did analyses with Excel and R. So looking at the recruitment process, there were 182 projects in March of 2021. And then we filtered these projects based off of biological and biomedical topics for a total of 100 projects. Afterwards, we reached out to individuals whose contact information we had, and then we received additional referrals. So we had 70 total contacts. And then Dr. Claw and Dr. Garrison were sending personalized emails once a month, encouraging people to participate in our survey. We had 46 responses, and then we had to filter out individuals who did not complete or did not qualify for our survey. And at the end, we had 36 total responses. And looking at our demographics, we can see that most of our participants were between the ages of 40 and 59. Most identified as women and as white researchers, though 27% identified as Diné or Navajo. And getting more into the content of what we wanted to know, we asked participants, if the moratorium on genetic research were to end, can you foresee adding a genetics component to your project? And so we can see the distributions of yes, unsure, and no in the counts. We can also see that most of our participants were unsure about adding a genetics component. But we also wanted to understand this a little bit better. So I have exemplary quotes. So for someone who indicated yes, they said that genetics is needed to translate information about genes and sequences into knowledge about genetic susceptibility to disease. For someone who was unsure, while genetics is not my area of expertise, it would be an area to explore as it relates to American Indian Alaska Native health or obesity. And for someone who indicated no, our project is currently entirely anonymous, and I would not want to add any component that would include identifying information. So these quotes help us to better understand some of the reasons as to whether or not to add a genetics component to approved projects. But we also wanted to evaluate some other factors. So we looked at the potential benefits and potential risks. So one potential benefit of adding genetic research highlighted its importance in health research. And a quote that exemplified this was, "It is possible that researching the specific needs for Navajo people could lead to better prevention and treatment." A risk of including genetics highlighted the need to consider cultural aspects. So the biggest potential risk is how this may contradict people's cultural values and belief systems. So we identified a benefit and a risk, but for the purpose of today, I'm only showing one, but there were others. And we also look at the ethical considerations. So there were 5 broad topics. Community engagement, dissemination of results and data, privacy and rights, health, safety and equity, and discrimination and mistrust. So within these 5 broad categories, there were 4 statements that participants were asked to rank in order of importance. And these statements were derived from previous projects. And today I'll only be presenting on community engagement and dissemination of results and data, as I feel that is what we're doing today. Can we move forward to community engagement, please? One more. Oh, one more. Okay, next time I'm not putting animations in. Okay. So looking at our community engagement, we can see from most important to least important, but if something is ranked as least important, that doesn't mean it isn't important. So the statements within this section included building trust with the community, being transparent about the research plan, and involving community members in the research process, and including Diné or Navajo cultural beliefs. So if we look at the far column of most important, we can look for the highest distribution to inform what is the most important consideration. And here we found that building trust with the community is one of the most important considerations. And next slide, please. So with the dissemination of results and data, we can see it's the very similar format, or the same format really. but the statements within this section included giving presentations to the community, writing short reports in lay language for the community, publishing accurate and appropriate information, and sharing data with other researchers. Again, looking at the most important side, we see that giving presentations to the community is one of the most important considerations. So in drawing to a conclusion, we designed an online survey and distributed it to researchers with projects approved by the Navajo IRB. And today I showed factors that influence whether or not to add a genetics component, including benefits, risks, and ethical considerations. And all of this really goes to highlight that genetic policies are needed. And I want to leave us here with this quote: I applaud the work you are doing to understand the community readiness and desire to include genetic research. The decision must come from within the community. And for the acknowledgements, I don't know if it'll come up, but it's our research team, the Claw Lab, its members, the Navajo Nation and our entities and funding resources. Yeah, thank you. And I guess we'll move on to more questions.
Thank you. As you see, the work is pretty extensive and it involves a ton of partners and a ton of community members as well. So we've got about a little over 10 minutes or so for questions. I have one to kind of just start the discussion, and that's, with genomic research, you mentioned before how it's sensitive work. There's a lot of challenges to overcome when you're doing, especially developing a policy for this kind of work. So why is it so important? Why is it kind of distinguished among other types of research? And why is the work important to you? So I'll let all of you panelists go ahead and answer that.
So just to recap the question, why is genetic research or genomic research different from other types of research? I think this is a good question. I think from the researcher perspective, I really think of genetics as sort of a tool in my toolbox of things. So a lot of people have their public health prevention tools. I use genomic tools as a part of my work. So from that perspective, I think of it more as a tool, but as a Navajo researcher and thinking about the cultural implications of what is DNA. I won't define it in Navajo, but it's Ina Petlol, and Ina means life. And so I think that really hits home for me, at least. When people sequence your DNA, you are getting information not only about yourself, but also your relatives, your ancestors. And once that DNA is sequenced, often it can live forever beyond your lifetime. So it is really important to think about where that data is stored. And also you often obtain DNA from different samples. So these can be blood samples, these can be cheek swab samples. So it's giving a part of yourself for someone else to look at the DNA, or you can look at it yourself as well. So I think there are different components that make genetic information a little bit different from other types of information. So in that way, I think of that. I think genetics could have a lot of implications for communities, but also when you submit your sample, you're not only just looking at yourself. Like I said, you're looking at your whole family. So if you submit your sample, that's 50% from your mom, 50% from your dad, and that could tell a lot of information. And also your siblings, your first cousins, all of this, it's not just you. So you have to think about your community as you think about participating in research. And like I said, data storage and sample storage are also really important things to think about. So thank you.
The next echigo adole nanish sada ilanigito bohonet sanigito at I see Tshago hajot, tshago be shahoton nilto, be akat o washigi. Johat ashe ban sakis adole important noya, important, and it will important. So in my mind, I guess I'm just thinking, what is the significance? What is the true significance of an effort like this? Because genetics basically to me it's information that is generational. It's generational, and it's something that if there is ways that we can find answers to some of the biggest challenges in our communities. You know, some of the biggest challenges in our communities is we know are like cancer and diabetes and health-related issues. If we can find answers and at least find some clues through this type of an effort, I think it would be something significant. Even in a small measure, small steps that we can make, it'll make a difference for all of our communities around the world. So thank you.
So building off of Dr. Claw and Mr. Phelps, I feel like they both touched on at least the cultural considerations, but I guess for me, the part of why genetics is important to study. In one of my earlier science classes, there was a quote that just because we can doesn't mean we should. And so thinking about the justifications and research motivations, I've heard researchers be like, oh, that's interesting, that's cool, I want to pursue it, but not necessarily thinking about how it can impact a community. So that's one of my research goals is when working with Indigenous and underrepresented communities, what are the research questions and what are the outcomes? Not that it's just cool. I don't mean to be throwing like shade, but just saying.
Thank you for that insight. I don't know if we have time for like one audience question. I'm not too sure how that works, but we can take an audience question. Oh, sorry, there's a light, so I can't really see. So go ahead.
Yes. Your IRB materials, if you allow for it and wording in there to cover future technologies. For example, the PDB diabetes data set was created initially in the 60s. Now it's being used for machine learning. And while some of it is for predicting development of diabetes within families, the way the database is set up, I'm quite sure that when the people signed the paperwork in the 60s, that is not necessarily something they would have thought of. I was just wondering how you were planning to cover some of those future potential problems.
Yes, so the question from the audience was that how is the group and how is the policy taking into account future technologies and keeping things kind of evergreen throughout the policy to make sure that those future technologies, future methods are still covered by all the work that's been going on today.
Yeah, and for those who have never been through the Navajo IRB process, it is quite extensive. And in the research code for the Navajo Nation, it requires projects to be very specific and also to acknowledge that all of the future or all of the data generated in the project will be returned to the Navajo Nation. So I think that there are specific project end dates to all of the Navajo IRB approved projects. So even with our qualitative project, we said that after the study has been completed, we will give all of that data to the Navajo Nation to do with as they see fit. So that is a part of tribal sovereignty. And I think that this probably will apply to future genomic studies. I think it will require them to be very focused and to think about the future implications of the data and the samples in any of those studies. So right now, the Navajo IRB requires quarterly reports. and an annual report submitted by every single project that is approved by the IRB. And most of these are health related projects. So they're quite extensive, and every publication has to be approved by the Navajo IRB as well as presentations. So we were able to get approval for this presentation before we came here today. So they are aware that we are here. So it's quite extensive oversight for the Navajo IRB at least. But that does bring up a good point. I know that a lot of tribes that don't have this infrastructure in place, it can be very contentious, especially a lot of people now might have collected samples back in the 60s and have them stored. Non-natives, mostly non-natives, have them stored in their freezers. And this is what people refer to as freezer diving. And so now with the new technologies coming out, you don't need a lot of sample to even sequence a whole genome. So people have gone back to some of those freezer samples collected from indigenous communities and are publishing new papers on them, which I think is ethically wrong. And I think some method of accountability has to be put in place for many of these institutions.
And just to add on to that, I think for the policy itself, when I was part of the group a couple of years ago, taking off my ASU hat, putting on my old Navajo Nation hat, we took the approach of codifying and putting into policy more like general principles and ideas of saying, like, this is the information we want to protect. We want to protect it in this way. And we want to make sure that these considerations are taken into account rather than writing out an entire specific process. It focuses more on the general principles so that there's room for new technologies and room for new methodology. So I think with that, our time is about up. So thank you all for sharing your time, and thank you so much to the panel for sharing your knowledge and expertise. Thank you. Yes.
So thank you again to our panelists, to Katrina Claw, Dr. Claw, Honorable Walter Phelps, and Carissa Sherman. I liked your last comment about not being cool. I was one of the uncool kids, so I can relate to that. But it's because I think it's important that we have these conversations in these settings. Just to recognize the Sandra Day O'Connor School of Law, which we're sitting in now, certainly would ultimately be part of that conversation in terms of Indian legal programs. What's in the agreement, what are in these contracts. My role at the university is intergovernmental, so I spend a significant amount of time on intergovernmental agreements and MOUs and MOAs, and so certainly this could be a whole session in itself, and perhaps one that we could put forward with the incoming dean in the spring. We have Stacy Leeds, who is Cherokee, who will be the new dean for the Sandra Day College of Law here in this space, and so we're honored that this university certainly recognizes not only having us in our own spaces, but having Indigenous people in spaces like this in terms of the law school. So with that, we're going to take a short break. We will